Right now, across every news network, you're watching the same story on repeat. Special forces descending from the sky, a Latin American president in handcuffs, commentators praising tactical precision and strategic brilliance. They want you focused on the spectacle, on the daring raid, on the military success, because if you're watching the helicopters, you're not watching the balance sheet. This wasn't regime change for democracy. This wasn't about human rights violations or drug cartels. This was a debt collection operation with gunships. There's an old rule in geopolitics that everyone pretends doesn't exist. You cannot sanction the countries that control your vital resources, not forever, not without consequences. For 23 years, the United States tried to defy this rule. They sanctioned Venezuela. They froze assets. They recognized parallel governments. They funded opposition movements. They did everything except the one thing they just did. Until this week, when all of that collapsed in the most revealing way possible. On December 28th, Nicolas Maduro signed energy agreements with China worth $18 billion. 2 days later, Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, quietly requested a meeting with Venezuelan officials in Panama, not to threaten, not to impose conditions, to negotiate access to oil that Washington has spent 2 decades trying to destroy. What you're witnessing is not diplomacy, it's capitulation that got interrupted by helicopters, and it reveals something critical. When an empire loses control over resources it once considered guaranteed, the collapse doesn't arrive gradually, it arrives in cascade. Let me show you the numbers that explain why this happened now, why this week, why this operation couldn't wait. Venezuela controls the largest certified oil reserves on the planet, 303.8 billion barrels. Iran, its strategic, another 208.6 billion. Together, they represent 32% of global proven reserves, and both have just formally exited the financial system controlled by Washington. This is not theory. This week marks the breaking point where the architecture that sustained American hegemony for 80 years began its irreversible disintegration. But to understand why American helicopters just landed in Caracas, you need to understand the world's largest oil producer, and therefore doesn't need to care about the Middle East or Latin America anymore. This is a half-truth, and in geopolitics, a half-truth is a full lie. The United States does produce massive amounts of oil, but it produces light, sweet crude. It's like champagne, bubbly, light, expensive to extract, and not what American refineries were built to process. The problem is this: the industrial backbone of American energy were built 50 years ago. They were designed to process heavy, sour crude, the thick, sludge-like oil that comes from Venezuela and the Middle East. America produces champagne, but its engines run on diesel.